My wife handed me divorce papers exactly 3 minutes after I retired. I stood there holding a glass of cheap champagne while my children, the people I had clothed and fed for 40 years, did not cry. They did not look away in shame. They clapped. My son popped a fresh bottle of wine and shouted that his mother was finally free from the dead weight. My daughter held up her phone, live streaming my humiliation to her followers, laughing about how the stingy old man was finally getting kicked to the curb. They thought they were discarding a broken, used-up warehouse manager who had nothing left to give but a meager pension. They thought they had timed it perfectly to take the house and leave me with nothing. But they made one critical calculation error. They looked at the calendar and saw October 31st, Halloween, a fitting day for a trick. But they forgot that tomorrow is November 1st, and because they could not wait 24 hours to destroy me, they just set fire to $15 million. Before I tell you how I ruined their lives by simply signing my name, please like and subscribe if you have ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to love you. The Golden Oak was not a fancy restaurant. It was the kind of place where the carpet smelled of stale beer and the steak was always a little too tough. But it was where we had celebrated every family milestone for 3 decades. It was fitting, I suppose, that it would be the site of my execution. I stood at the head of the long table, clearing my throat. I was 72 years old. My knees ached from years of what they thought was lifting boxes. My hands were calloused. I tapped a spoon against my glass, looking out at the faces of the 20 people gathered there. Most were neighbors or distant cousins, but in the center, sitting like royalty, were my wife, Cynthia, and our 2 children, Brandon and Brandon's wife, and my daughter, Megan, with her husband. I had prepared a speech. I wanted to thank Cynthia for sticking by me through the lean years. I wanted to tell Brandon and Megan how proud I was that they were finding their own way, even though I knew I was secretly paying for most of their lifestyles. I wanted to say that retirement was not an end, but a beginning for us. I barely got the words thank you out of my mouth before Cynthia stood up. She did not stand up to toast me. She stood up with a violent, sharp movement that knocked her chair back. She was wearing a red dress that I knew cost $600 because I had paid the credit card bill for it 2 weeks ago. She looked good for 68, but her eyes were hard. They were the eyes of a woman who had been holding her breath for a long time and was finally ready to exhale poison. "Sit down, Douglas," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a serrated knife. "You don't need to give a speech. Nobody wants to hear about your 45 years of moving boxes in a dusty warehouse. We are not here to celebrate your career. We are here to celebrate my future." The room went deadly silent, the kind of silence where you can hear the ice melting in the glasses. I looked at her confused. I thought maybe it was a joke, a roast. We Americans love a good roast, right? I forced a smile, waiting for the punchline. Cynthia reached under the table and pulled out a thick blue folder. She didn't hand it to me. She tossed it. It spun across the table, knocking over the salt shaker and landing right in the middle of the sheet cake that said, "Happy Retirement, Doug." The blue cardboard cut deep into the white frosting, splitting my name in half. "Happy retirement," she sneered. "Those are divorce papers. I had them drawn up months ago. I was just waiting for your last paycheck to clear so I wouldn't have to deal with your company anymore. I want you out of the house tonight." I stood frozen. The champagne in my glass suddenly felt like vinegar. I looked at the folder, watching the grease from the frosting seep into the paper. Then I looked at my children. This was the moment I thought. This was the moment my son, my 40-year-old son, whom I had bailed out of 3 failed startups, would stand up and defend his father. This was the moment my daughter, whose rent I had secretly paid for the last 5 years, would scream at her mother to stop this madness. But Brandon didn't stand up. He leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips that looked terrifyingly like his mother's. He started to clap, a slow, rhythmic clap. "About time. Mom." Brandon shouted. He grabbed the bottle of wine from the center of the table and popped the cork. It made a loud bang that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. "To Cynthia," he yelled, raising the bottle. "To freedom. To getting rid of the anchor." I looked at Megan. She was holding her phone up. The camera lens pointed directly at my face. She wasn't horrified. She was broadcasting. "Say something, Dad," she said, her voice dripping with mock pity. "Tell the internet how it feels to be single at 72. Don't worry, Mom gets the house. But I'm sure you can find a nice room in a basement somewhere. Maybe one of your warehouse buddies has a spare couch." The guests were shifting uncomfortably, looking at their plates, but nobody spoke up. They were witnessing a public flaying, and they were too stunned to intervene. I looked back at Cynthia. She walked around the table until she was standing right next to me. She smelled of the expensive perfume I bought her for Christmas and the white wine she had been drinking all afternoon. She leaned in close, so close that her lips brushed my ear. To anyone watching, it might have looked like a tender moment, a wife whispering a secret goodbye, but her words were venom. "You are useless to me now, Douglas," she whispered. Her voice was a hiss. "You are old. Your knees are bad. Your pension is pathetic. I did the math. You are going to bring in maybe $2,000 a month. That doesn't even cover my beauty treatments. I want to travel. I want to live. And I can't do that dragging a dead weight like you around. I'm selling the house. The market is high. I'm taking that money, and I'm going to Europe with my friends. You can take your little pension and rot in a state facility for all I care. Just sign the papers. Doug, don't make this harder than it has to be. You have no fight left in you." She pulled back and looked at me with triumph. She expected me to cry. She expected me to beg. She expected the broken old man who had spent his life apologizing for not being rich enough, for not being exciting enough. She saw a warehouse manager. But she didn't see me. She didn't see the man who had spent the last 20 years working as a shadow consultant for the largest logistics conglomerate in the country. She didn't see the man who had structured mergers worth billions. She didn't see the man who had lived below his means, driving a 10-year-old Ford and wearing off the rack suits precisely to protect his family from the rot of greed, a rot that had clearly consumed them anyway. I looked at the cake. I looked at the blue folder stained with sugar and grease. Slowly, deliberately, I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. Brandon laughed loudly. "Watch out," he jeered. "He's going for his coupons. He probably has a discount for a divorce lawyer in there." My son-in-law Todd crawled. Megan zoomed in with her camera. I pulled out my fountain pen. It was a Mont Blanc black resin with a gold nib. It was the one luxury I allowed myself. The pen I used to sign contracts that shaped the national supply chain. They didn't know what it was. To them, it was just a pen. I reached into the cake. My fingers got sticky with frosting, but I didn't care. I pulled the folder out. I opened it right there on the table. Cynthia watched me, her eyes narrowing. She had expected resistance. She had prepared for a scene. She wasn't prepared for silence. I flipped to the last page. I saw her signature already there, aggressive and loopy. I saw the date, October 31st. I looked at my watch. It was 8 p.m., 4 hours until midnight, 4 hours until November 1st. If I signed this now, our marriage was effectively over as of today. The division of assets would be calculated based on what we owned right now in this moment. The house, the modest savings account she knew about the car. But tomorrow was the vesting date. My contract with the conglomerate was unique. I took a low salary on paper to maintain my cover, but I had a massive package of stock options and performance bonuses that accumulated over 20 years. It was designed to vest entirely on the first day of my official retirement. November 1st, $15 million. That money would hit my private trust account at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. If we were still married tomorrow, half of that would be hers, $7.5 million. She could have gone to Europe. She could have bought a villa in Tuscany. She could have lived like the queen she thought she was. All she had to do was wait one single day. All she had to do was treat me with a shred of dignity for 24 more hours. But her greed was impatient. Her cruelty was urgent. She wanted to hurt me today. I uncapped the pen. The gold nib caught the light of the cheap chandelier. "Are you sure about this, Cynthia?" I asked. My voice was calm. It didn't shake. This terrified her for a second. I saw it in her eyes. But then Brandon shouted from the table, "Just sign it, old man. Stop stalling." "Yeah, Dad," Megan added. "Don't be pathetic. Let her go." Cynthia's doubt vanished. She sneered. "Sign it. Douglas, be a man for once in your life. Give me the house and get out." I looked at her one last time. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't heartbreak. It was the feeling of a heavy chain snapping and falling to the ground. I was free. I put the pen to the paper. The ink flowed smoothly, black and permanent. I signed my name. Douglas Bennett. I dated it. October 31st. I closed the folder. I didn't wipe the frosting off. I handed it back to her. She snatched it like a starving dog grabbing a bone. She clutched it to her chest, beaming at the room. "I got it," she announced. "I'm free." The room erupted in applause again. My children cheered. My daughter-in-law clapped. I capped my pen and placed it back in my pocket. I took a napkin and wiped the frosting from my fingers. Then I leaned in close to Cynthia, mirroring the way she had whispered to me moments ago. She was smiling, expecting me to say something sad. I lowered my voice so only she could hear, but I put enough weight behind the words to crush her soul eventually. "Congratulations, Cynthia," I whispered. "You just won the lottery in reverse. You have absolutely no idea what you just did." I didn't wait for her response. I turned my back on the table, on the cake, on the cheering children who were celebrating their own financial funeral. I walked toward the exit. "Where are you going?" Brandon shouted after me. "You going to cry in the car?" I said without turning around. "I'm going to start my life." I pushed open the heavy wooden doors of the golden oak and stepped out into the cool October night. The air tasted crisp. Behind me, I could still hear the muffled sounds of their celebration. They were drinking to my demise. I pulled out my phone. I had one call to make, not to a friend, not to a therapist. I dialed a number I had memorized but rarely used. "Leo," I said when the voice answered on the first ring. "Doug, it's late. Is everything okay for tomorrow?" Leo asked. Leo Graves was the shark I kept in a tank for special occasions. He charged $1,500 an hour, and he was worth every penny. "Change of plans." "Leo," I said, walking toward the curb to hail a cab. "The transfer tomorrow. Ensure it goes into the new trust account, the one with my name only." There was a pause on the line. Then the sharp, intelligent sound of Leo sitting up straighter. "Did she do it?" Leo asked. "She did." I confirmed. "She served me tonight. It's signed. Dated today." There was a low whistle on the other end of the line. She missed the vesting cliff by 4 hours. 4 hours, I said. My God, Leo said, and I could hear the cold smile in his voice. That is going to be the most expensive party she ever threw. Where are you going? I looked back at the restaurant. I looked at the old Ford parked in the lot, the car I had driven for a decade to prove I was a humble man. I decided to leave it there. Let Brandon tow it. He liked that car. I'm standing on the curb, I said. I'll send a car, Leo said. Don't go to a hotel. Come to the tower. The penthouse is ready. We have work to do. I hung up. I stood there in the dark, waiting for the sleek black car that Leo would send. I wasn't Douglas, the warehouse manager, anymore. I was Douglas Bennett, the man who controlled 15% of the state's logistics network, and I had just been declared war upon by a group of amateurs. They wanted the house. They wanted my pension. They wanted to see me broken. They were going to get the house, but they were about to find out that a house without money is just a pile of bricks that eats cash. They were about to find out that the credit cards they loved to swipe didn't get paid by magic. As the headlights of a Mercedes approached, cutting through the darkness, I allowed myself a small, grim smile. Happy retirement indeed. I didn't go back to the house that night. There was no point. I knew what I would find. They would have changed the locks. They would have put my bags on the porch, probably in the rain or near the sprinklers, just to be spiteful. They wanted a reaction. They wanted me to bang on the door and scream so they could call the police and finalize the narrative of the crazy, desperate old man. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. Instead, I sat in the back of the Mercedes Leo had sent. The leather was soft. The interior smelled of expensive cedar. It was a stark contrast to the sticky vinyl of the booth I had just been sitting in. The driver didn't ask questions. He just drove toward the city skyline, toward the Sterling Tower, a gleaming spire of glass and steel that dominated the downtown district. Most people in the city knew the Sterling Tower. It was where the billionaires lived. It was where the tech moguls and the old money families kept their pietars. What nobody knew, what even Cynthia didn't know, was that I owned the penthouse. I had bought it 5 years ago through a shell company. It was my escape plan, my investment, my secret sanctuary for the day. I finally stopped playing the role of the humble worker. I had planned to surprise Cynthia with it. I had imagined a day where I would take her up the private elevator, open the doors to the panoramic view, and say, "We made it." Now I was going there alone. And honestly, the air conditioning felt better than her embrace ever had. The car pulled up to the private entrance. The doorman nodded at me. "Good evening, Mr. Bennett. Good to see you again." "Good evening, Carl," I said. I took the elevator to the 40th floor. My ears popped as we ascended. The doors slid open, and I stepped onto white marble floors. Leo Graves was waiting for me in the living room. He was a man of 50 sharp features, wearing a suit that cost more than my son's car. He was holding 2 glasses of amber liquid, 30-year-old scotch. Leo said, handing me one. "I figured you wouldn't want champagne." "You figured right," I said, taking the glass. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city lay spread out below me, a grid of lights and moving cars. Somewhere out there in the suburbs, in a much smaller, darker house, my family was probably dividing up my old vinyl records and arguing over who got the big TV. "So," Leo said, standing beside me, "it's done." "It's done," I said. "Signed. Witnessed by 20 people. Recorded on video by my daughter." Leo chuckled. "She recorded it. That's admissible evidence." Proves you didn't coerce her. Proves she initiated it. Proves the date and time. She did our job for us. They clapped. Leo, I said, taking a sip of the scotch. It burned a good clean burn. My children clapped. Leo didn't offer fake sympathy. That's why I liked him. He dealt in facts. They clapped because they think they won the jackpot. They think they got the house and got rid of the expense. They don't realize the expense was the only thing keeping them afloat. He walked over to the large mahogany desk in the corner of the room and opened a laptop. Let's review the situation. Leo said, just to be clear, today is October 31st. You are officially separated. The divorce filing will be processed tomorrow morning, but the date of separation is today. That freezes the marital assets. Correct, I said. Tomorrow, November 1st, your contract with Global Logistics concludes. The vesting clause triggers $15 million in stock options and performance bonuses transfer to your account. Since this income is realized post-separation and is contingent on a date that occurs after the marriage ended, it is entirely separate property. And the house? I asked. The house is in both your names, Leo said. But you're going to give it to her. That's what she wanted, right? She demanded it. I said, she said she's selling it to travel. Leo smiled, a shark smelling blood. She can't sell it yet. Title transfer takes time, and in the meantime, she has to maintain it. Doug, tell me about the household finances. I sat down in a leather armchair. I managed everything. Cynthia never wanted to look at a bill. She thought it was boring. She thinks the mortgage is paid off. Is it? No. I said, I refinanced it 5 years ago to buy the equity for this apartment. There's still $400,000 on the house. The monthly payment is $3,000. Property taxes are another $800 a month. Utilities in that drafty old place run about $500 in the winter. And her income, she gets a spousal benefit from Social Security, maybe $800. She has no savings. She thinks we have a joint savings account with $200,000 in it. And do you? Leo asked, though he knew the answer. We did, I said. But I used that money to pay off the debts Brandon accrued last year when his crypto investment went south, and I used the rest to pay off Megan's credit cards so she wouldn't get sued. Cynthia doesn't know. She thinks the money is sitting there. Leo tapped on his keyboard. So, she has a house with a massive mortgage, no cash, and an income of $800. And tomorrow, you disappear. Not just me, I said. I pulled out my phone. I need to kill the autopay. For 10 years, I had been the invisible engine of my family's life. I didn't just pay the mortgage. I paid Brandon's AMX bill every month. It was set to autopay from my private account. He thought he had a magic credit card with no limit. I paid Megan's rent. She told her husband she got a family discount from the landlord. I paid the landlord directly. I paid for Cynthia's life insurance, her car lease, her country club membership. I opened my banking app. Do it, Leo said softly. I scrolled to Brandon's credit card. Cancel autopay. I scrolled to Megan's landlord. Cancel recurring transfer. I scrolled to the house utilities. Power, water, gas, internet. Cancel, cancel, cancel. I scrolled to Cynthia's car lease. Cancel. It took less than 2 minutes. With a few taps of my thumb, I dismantled the artificial reality they lived in. I turned off the lights on their fantasy. It's done, I said, putting the phone down. Now, Leo said, closing the laptop. We wait. The first domino falls in about 30 days. But the panic starts much sooner. I looked out at the city again. I thought about Brandon popping that champagne. I hoped he enjoyed it. It was the last bottle he was going to drink for a very long time. "Leo," I said, "I want to draft a document." "What kind? An eviction notice?" I said for Megan. "You want to kick her out?" "Not me." I said her landlord. "Once the check doesn't clear on the 1st, which is tomorrow, he's going to be very unhappy. I want you to call him. Tell him the guarantor has withdrawn. Tell him he needs to seek payment from the tenant." Leo nodded. "Ruthless. I love it." "And Brandon," I continued. "His card cycles on the 5th. He usually runs up about $5,000 a month on dinners and business expenses. When that autopay doesn't hit, the bank is going to lock his card within 48 hours. He'll call you," Leo warned. "He can't." I said, "I'm changing my number tonight. You are my only point of contact." I stood up and walked to the bedroom of the penthouse. It was huge, silent, and empty. It was perfect. I lay down on the bed with sheets that cost more than Cynthia's wardrobe. I thought I would feel guilty. I thought I would feel the tug of fatherhood, the instinct to protect them one last time. But then I remembered the cake. I remembered the blue folder sitting in the frosting. I remembered the sound of their applause. They wanted me gone. They wanted my money, but not me. Well, they got their wish. I was gone. And the money was right here with me in the tower high above the clouds. I closed my eyes and fell into the deepest, most peaceful sleep I had had in 40 years. Tomorrow was November 1st. Tomorrow I became a very, very rich man. And tomorrow their world would begin to burn. I stood on the porch of the house I had paid for since 1985. The cab was idling at the curb, the meter running a ticking clock on my patience. I inserted my key into the deadbolt. It slid in only halfway. It hit a metal blockage. I jiggled it. Nothing. I pulled it out and looked at the lock. It was shiny, new brass. They hadn't just planned the divorce papers. They had a locksmith on standby. While I was at the restaurant being humiliated, someone was here erasing my access. Efficient, ruthless. I turned around. The automatic sprinklers hissed to life. The timing was impeccable. The jets of water swept across the lawn, soaking the grass. The walkway and the pile of black garbage bags dumped near the rose bushes. I walked over. It wasn't garbage. It was my clothes, my flannel shirts, my work boots, the few books I kept on the nightstand. They were heaped in a soden mound, absorbing the water like a sponge. The porch light flicked on. The heavy wooden door opened, but the glass storm door remained locked. Cynthia stood there. She was still wearing the red dress, holding a glass of wine. She looked like she was watching a reality show. "I told you I wanted you out tonight." "Douglas," she said through the glass. Her voice was muffled but distinct. "Did you think I was joking?" "My key doesn't work," I said. I didn't shout. I just stated the fact. "Of course it doesn't." She laughed. It was a sharp, brittle sound. "I changed the locks an hour ago. Brandon helped. He is such a good boy. He didn't want his mother to feel unsafe with a stranger in the house." "A stranger," I repeated. "I paid the mortgage on this house for 30 years, and now it is mine." She snapped. "That is how settlements work. You get your freedom. I get the assets. Go stay at a Motel 6, Doug. Your pension should cover a night or two if you skip dinner, or maybe sleep in that old car of yours." "Oh, wait, you left it at the restaurant." I looked at her. I looked at the woman I had shared a bed with for decades. There was no love left, not even hate, just disgust. "I need my medication," I said, "and my files from the study. I put everything in the yard." She gestured with her wine glass toward the count pile. "If you can't find it, that is your problem." Now, get off my property before I call the police. Imagine that. Getting arrested on your retirement night. She locked the inner door. The deadbolt slid home with a heavy thud. The porch light clicked off, plunging me into darkness. I walked to the pile on the grass. The water was cold, soaking into my shoes. I found the small leather satchel that contained my blood pressure pills. It was ruined, the leather dark and warped. I didn't bother with the clothes. I didn't bother with the books. I left them there to rot on her precious lawn. I walked back to the cab. The driver looked at me with pity. "Rough night, buddy," he asked. "You have no idea," I said. "Take me to the Sterling Tower." He looked at me in the rearview mirror, confused. "The Sterling Tower? That is downtown? That is expensive. Just drive," I said. As we pulled away, I looked back at the house one last time. I saw the silhouette of my son Brandon in the window, watching me leave. He waved. A mocking, childish wave. He thought he was waving goodbye to a loser. He didn't know he was waving goodbye to his credit limit. That was the moment the last thread of guilt snapped. I had worried that my plan was too harsh, too cold. But seeing my clothes soaking in the mud while my wife drank wine and my son laughed. No, it wasn't harsh enough. I settled into the seat. The cold water from my shoes seeped into the floor mat. I took a deep breath. It was over. The charade of the humble husband was finished. The man who stepped out of this cab would be someone they had never met, someone with nothing to lose and 15 million reasons to win. The cab driver pulled up to the curb, looking at the towering glass facade of the Sterling Tower with a mixture of awe and suspicion. He turned to look at me in the back seat. My hair was plastered to my forehead with rainwater from my own lawn. My shoes were squishing against his floor mats. My jacket smelled like wet wool and betrayal. "Are you sure this is the place, pal?" he asked. "This is a private residence. They don't just let anyone in." I didn't answer him. I pulled a crisp $100 bill from my wallet, the leather damp and cold, and placed it on the center console. "Keep the change," I said. I stepped out onto the sidewalk. The rain had stopped downtown, but the air was cold. The Sterling Tower rose 60 stories into the night sky, a monolith of black glass and steel that screamed exclusion. It was a fortress for the masters of the universe. And for the last 10 years, I had walked past it every day, wearing work boots, pretending I didn't own the crown jewel at the very top. The doorman, a giant of a man named Carl, who had been with the building since it opened, stepped out from under the gold awning. He took one look at my sodden clothes, my slumped shoulders, and he didn't blink. He didn't move to block me. He stepped forward and opened the heavy glass door. "Good evening, Mr. Bennett," Carl said. His voice was respectful, devoid of judgment. "Welcome home." "Thank you." "Carl," I replied. My voice sounded different already. The rasp of the pleading husband was gone. The timbre of the warehouse manager was fading. In its place was the voice I used in boardrooms when I told CEOs they were about to lose their companies if they didn't listen to me. I walked across the lobby. The floors were Italian marble white with gray veins. My wet shoes squeaked, leaving a trail of muddy footprints. I didn't care. I owned the floor. I took the private elevator at the far end of the hall. It required a retinal scan. I leaned in. The red light swept my eye. The doors hissed open. The ride to the 40th floor took less than 30 seconds. My ears popped. With every floor we passed, I felt a layer of Douglas the doormat peeling away. By the time the doors opened into the penthouse foyer, my posture had straightened. My chin was up. Leo Graves was standing by the fireplace looking at a tablet. He was wearing a navy suit that fit him like a second skin. He didn't look like a lawyer who handled divorces. He looked like a lawyer who handled wars. He looked up as I entered, taking in my appearance with a single clinical glance. "Rough night at the warehouse?" Leo asked dryly. You could say that I answered walking past him to the wet bar. I poured myself a glass of water. I needed to wash the taste of cheap champagne out of my mouth. Leo walked over to the massive mahogany desk that dominated the living room. He picked up a thick leather binder and a set of heavy magnetic keys. "Your access cards and the master key for the unit," Leo said, sliding them across the polished wood. "You have full biometric clearance now. No more shell companies. As of midnight, the title transfer initiates to your primary trust. You are officially the ghost in the castle." I picked up the keys. They felt heavy, substantial. They felt like power. "And the financials?" I asked. Leo tapped the leather binder. "It is all here. Doug. The vesting schedule for the global logistics options triggers at 9 a.m. tomorrow, $15 million. The shadow accounts are active. The offshore holdings are secure. And I have taken the liberty of preparing a forensic accounting of your marital assets versus your separate property." I opened the binder. Columns of numbers stared back at me. It was a map of my hidden empire. For years, I had looked at these numbers in secret, feeling guilty, feeling like I was holding out on my family. Now, looking at them, I felt only relief. This was my armor. This was my sword. "She thinks I have a pension of $2,000 a month," I said, running my finger down the page. Leo chuckled a low, dangerous sound. "She is going to be very disappointed. According to this, your monthly passive income from the bond yields alone is $40,000. And that is before the stock options hit. Doug, you aren't just rich. You are a whale, and she just cut you loose in the ocean." I looked at my reflection in the dark window. I saw an old man in wet clothes, but behind the eyes, the fire was back. I wasn't the man who fixed the leaky faucet to save $50 anymore. I wasn't the man who ate leftovers so his son could have a steak. I stripped off my wet jacket and threw it on the floor. I unbuttoned the flannel shirt Cynthia had bought me for my birthday 5 years ago. The one she said made me look rugged, but really just made me look cheap. I tossed it onto the pile. "I need a suit." "Leo," I said, "the walk-in closet is stocked." Leo replied, "Italian wool, silk ties, just like you asked." I walked toward the bedroom, but I stopped at the doorway. "Leo," I said. He looked up from his tablet. "When the transfer hits tomorrow, I want you to send a notification to the bank. Not my bank, theirs." "Which one?" Leo asked. "All of them," I said. "Brandon's credit card, Megan's landlord, the mortgage company. Trigger the freeze. I want them to wake up to a cold reality." Leo smiled. It was the smile of a predator watching the trap snap shut. "Consider it done, Mr. Bennett." I walked into the bedroom and closed the door. I stood in the silence of my multi-million-dollar fortress. I was alone. I was soaked. I was divorced. And I had never felt more powerful in my entire life. The old Doug was dead. He died on that porch in the rain. The man who woke up tomorrow would be the man who owned the city. Leo sat across from me in one of the high-backed leather chairs, the heavy binder of financial documents open on his lap. The city lights below us were a distant galaxy irrelevant to the gravity of what we were discussing in this room. He tapped his finger against a specific paragraph on page 42 of my employment contract, a document I hadn't looked at in 20 years, but had memorized down to the punctuation. You know, Doug Leo said, his voice carrying a tone of professional admiration mixed with disbelief. In my 30 years of practicing law, I have seen bad timing. I have seen guys sell their companies a week before a market crash. I have seen prenups signed on napkins. But this is a masterpiece of accidental self-destruction. I took a sip of the scotch. It was warming me up, chasing away the chill of the rain and the memory of my wife's sneer. Explain it to me like I am the jury. Leo, I said, I want to hear it out loud. I need to know it is real. Leo spun the binder around so I could see the clause. It was bolded, vesting schedule, executive shadow consultant, retention package. Here is the mechanics of it. Leo began tracing the line with his expensive pen. When Global Logistics hired you 20 years ago, they didn't hire you to manage a warehouse. That was the cover. They hired you because you were the only man in the country who understood how to optimize their transcontinental shipping routes without triggering anti-rust violations. You were their architect, their ghost. I nodded. It was true. For 2 decades, I put on my work boots and my flannel shirts and drove to the warehouse. My family thought I was checking inventory sheets and yelling at forklift drivers. In reality, I walked into a soundproof glass office in the back, logged onto a secure server, and moved billions of dollars of freight across the globe. I solved bottlenecks in the Suez Canal before breakfast. I renegotiated fuel contracts while eating a ham sandwich. I was a shadow consultant. The company paid me a warehouse manager's salary on the books to keep my identity off the corporate radar, protecting me from headhunters and corporate espionage. But the real compensation was deferred. The golden handcuffs, Leo said. That is what they call this to keep you from leaving to a competitor. They structured your compensation as a massive one-time vesting event, 20 years of performance bonuses, stock options, and profit sharing, all accumulating in an escrow account, untouchable, invisible until the date of your official retirement. November 1st, I said softly. Tomorrow. Leo corrected. At 9 a.m., when the markets open. That is the trigger. Now, here is where your wife just committed financial suicide. He pulled out the divorce decree Cynthia had thrown into the cake. It was stained with grease, but the date next to her aggressive signature was crystal clear. October 31st. By serving you today, Leo said, leaning forward, his eyes intense. By forcing you to sign today, and by dating the separation agreement today, she has legally defined the end of the marriage. As of this moment, the marital estate is closed. The snapshot of your shared assets was taken when that pen hit the paper, and the $15 million I asked. Leo smiled. It was a shark's smile. Since the vesting event happens tomorrow post-separation, and since the contract stipulates that the funds are contingent upon the completion of the employment term, which ends at midnight tonight, that money is classified as future income. It is separate property. If she had waited 24 hours, Doug, just one day, that $15 million would have hit the account while you were still married. It would have been community property. She would have been entitled to $7.5 million. I looked at the date on the paper. October 31st. She had been so eager. She had been so desperate to humiliate me at the party, to make a show of kicking me out on the very last day of my working life. She wanted to twist the knife. She wanted to hurt me. I said she didn't care about the money. She thought there wasn't any. She thought she was discarding a husk. Leo agreed. She thought she was throwing away a man with a $2,000 pension. She didn't know she was holding a winning lottery ticket and setting it on fire because she didn't like the way the paper felt. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked at my reflection. I wasn't just a warehouse manager. I was the man who had saved global logistics from bankruptcy in 2008. I was the man who had designed the automated routing system they use today. I had built an empire from a back room, and I had done it all for them, for Cynthia, for the kids. I wanted to surprise them. I wanted to hand them the world. But they didn't want the world. They wanted to see me bleed. So I asked, turning back to Leo, "It is ironclad. It is titanium," Leo said. "I have already drafted the filings. We submit the signed divorce papers at 8 a.m. tomorrow. The court stamps them. The marriage is dissolved retroactively to the date of separation. 1 hour later, at 9 a.m., the 15 million lands in your new individual trust account. She gets the house, the debt, and half of a checking account that currently has $500 in it. You get the Sterling Tower penthouse and enough capital to buy a small island." I looked at the binder again. I thought about the times Cynthia had called me cheap because I wouldn't buy a new car. I thought about Brandon mocking my coupons. They had no idea that every dollar I saved was being compounded into this moment. "She is going to fight it," I said. "When she finds out, let her," Leo said, closing the binder with a heavy thud. She signed the agreement. She initiated the divorce. She chose the date. No judge in this state will overturn a settlement that she demanded drafted and forced you to sign in front of 20 witnesses. She dug the hole dug. All we are doing is filling it in. I walked over to the bar and poured another splash of the 30-year-old scotch. I raised the glass to the empty room. "To November 1st, I said. Leo raised his glass. "To November 1st. The most expensive day in Cynthia Bennett's life. The reality of it settled over me. I wasn't just safe. I was victorious. The shadow consultant had pulled off one last job. I had moved the most valuable asset of all myself out of a toxic liability and into a secure future. And the best part was, I didn't even have to lie. I just had to sign my name exactly when she told me to." Leo placed the open laptop in front of me on the mahogany desk. The screen glowed in the dim light of the penthouse, a single window into the financial circulatory system of the Bennett family. For a decade, I had been the heart-pumping blood into their lives, keeping them warm, keeping them fed, keeping them delusional. Now it was time to stop the beat. I logged into the primary banking portal. The interface was familiar. A grid of green numbers and scheduled transactions that I used to check every Friday like a religious ritual. First up was Brandon, my son, the self-proclaimed entrepreneur. He carried a Platinum MX in his wallet that he loved to flash at bars. He told his friends his startup was booming. He told his wife that clients paid for those $500 sushi dinners. He didn't know that the card was a supplementary line on my account. I looked at the pending transaction for next week. A lease payment on a BM bomb W he couldn't afford. I clicked the tab marked Authorized Users. I found Brandon's name. I hovered over the suspend button. I thought about him popping that champagne bottle. I thought about his laugh. I clicked. The status changed from active to suspended. The next time he tried to buy a round of drinks to impress a stranger, the machine would decline him. He would feel a fraction of the shame he tried to make me feel tonight. Next was Megan. My daughter lived in a 2-bedroom condo in the trendy part of the city. She told her husband Todd that the landlord gave them a special rate because she was an influencer. The truth was, the rent was $4,000 a month. She paid $2,000. I paid the other $2,000 via a direct AC transfer that went out on the 1st of every month. Tomorrow was the 1st. I opened the Recurring Transfers tab. I selected the payment to Highland Properties. Delete. Confirm. When the landlord checked his ledger tomorrow morning, he would see a $2,000 hole. And Megan was about to learn that influence doesn't pay the rent. Then there was Cynthia. Her lifestyle was a house of cards built on my silence. I scrolled down to the insurance premiums. There was a massive whole life policy on me with her as the sole beneficiary. She had insisted on it years ago, claiming she needed security. I had been paying $600 a month to ensure she got rich if I died. I canceled the auto draft, let the policy lapse. If she wanted to bet on my death, she could pay the premiums herself. Finally, the crown jewel of her ego, the Oakwood Country Club. Cynthia wasn't just a member. She was on the social committee. She spent her days playing tennis and drinking mimosas with women who judged each other by their handbags. The monthly dues were $1,200. I had set it up to draft from my personal checking account to spare her the hassle. I selected the payee. I hit remove. Leah watched me from across the desk, sipping his scotch. He didn't say a word. He knew this wasn't about money. This was about gravity. I was turning gravity back on for people who had been floating for years. I closed the laptop. The screen went black. The room was silent. There were no explosions, no sirens, just the quiet digital severing of the umbilical cords. They were all sleeping in their beds right now, dreaming of the money they thought they had won. They had no idea that while they slept, the roof had been removed, the walls had been taken down, and the cold wind of reality was already blowing in. I pushed the laptop away. I was done being the provider. Tomorrow, they would have to learn how to survive. It takes exactly 30 days for the utility companies in this state to process a delinquency notice and flip the digital switch. I know this because I used to manage the routing logistics for their meter maintenance crews. It is a cold, automated system that does not care about your social standing, your excuses, or the fact that you are hosting a gala to celebrate your new single life. It only cares that the account holder, me, canceled the service and the new occupant, my ex-wife, ignored the 3 bright pink warning notices that arrived in the mail. She probably threw them in the trash without looking, just like she did with my clothes. I wasn't there to see it. But Leo hired a private investigator to keep an eye on the assets, specifically the house, to ensure she wasn't destroying the property value before the bank inevitably foreclosed. The report I received the next morning was detailed enough that I could close my eyes and see every moment of her humiliation. Cynthia had decided to throw what she called a new beginnings party. She invited the entire neighborhood, her country club friends, and anyone else she wanted to impress. She wanted to show the world that dumping Douglas Bennett was the best thing that ever happened to her. She hired a catering company, likely putting the deposit on a credit card that was inching closer to its limit every day. She had a string quartet playing in the living room. The house was blazing with light, every chandelier on the heat cranked up to combat the November chill. At 700p, she was holding court in the center of the living room, wearing a new sequined gown, holding a glass of champagne. She was telling a group of women how relieved she was to finally have the house to herself, how she was planning to remodel the kitchen with Italian marble next month. She was selling a fantasy of wealth and independence. At 7:15, the fantasy hit a wall. The report said it happened right as she was raising a toast. The lights didn't flicker. They didn't dim. They simply vanished. 1 second, the room was bathed in golden light. The next, it was plunged into absolute suffocating darkness. The music stopped abruptly as the electric cello lost its power. A collective gasp went through the room, followed by the nervous laughter of people who think it is just a momentary glitch. Cynthia shouted for everyone to stay calm. She claimed it must be a neighborhood outage, a transformer blown down the street. She fumbled for her phone using the flashlight to navigate through the confused guests. She called the power company, putting on her most authoritative voice, ready to demand they fix the grid. I can only imagine the color draining from her face when the automated operator told her that service to the address had been suspended for non-payment and lack of a valid account holder. She had been living on my credit for so long. She forgot that electricity wasn't free. But the night wasn't done with her yet. The catering staff was in the kitchen trying to salvage the dinner by candlelight. They needed water to rinse the plates and prep the next course. One of the servers turned the tap. A sputter of air, a brown trickle of sediment, and then nothing. I had cancelled the water service on the same day as the power. The city was just as efficient as the electric company. Word spread through the dark party faster than the cold air that was beginning to seep in. There was no power. There was no water. The toilets wouldn't flush. The heating system was dead. The expensive hors d'oeuvres were sitting in the dark. The guests didn't stay long. People like Cynthia's friends don't do discomfort. They don't do tragedy unless it is gossip. Within 20 minutes, the driveway was full of headlights as cars pulled away. They weren't leaving with admiration for the strong, independent woman. They were leaving with whispers about how Cynthia Bennett couldn't even pay her light bill. By 8:30, the house was empty. The report said Cynthia stood on the porch screaming at the departing cars, blaming everyone but herself. Then she went back inside, into the cold, into the dark, into the house she had fought so hard to steal, only to realize she didn't know how to keep it alive. She sat in the dark of a 4-bedroom tomb, wrapped in her expensive dress, shivering, while across the city. I sat by my fireplace, warm lit by the glow of the city, and turned the page of my book. Gravity had officially kicked in while my wife was sitting in the freezing darkness of a house she no longer knew how to operate. My son Brandon was 10 miles away, standing under the bright, unforgiving halogen lights of a Porsche dealership. He was doing what he did best, which was spending money he had not earned to impress people who did not care about him. According to the credit monitoring alerts that were popping up on my phone like little notifications of Justice Brandon was attempting to purchase a $90,000 sports car. He had his arm around his wife Kayla, pointing at the sleek gray machine as if he had designed it himself. He was loud. He was confident. He was telling the salesman that his startup was about to close a massive seed round and he needed a vehicle that reflected his new tax bracket. He was celebrating what he called the liberation of the family assets. He truly believed that with me out of the picture, the imaginary vault of Bennett family wealth was finally open for looting. I can picture the scene perfectly because I know my son. He would have worn his best watch, the one I bought him for graduation. He would have been leaning casually against the sales desk, tapping his fingers, eager to sign the papers and drive off into his delusion. He pulled out his wallet. It was a slim Italian leather piece. He extracted the heavy metal Platinum American Express card. This was his talisman. For 10 years, he had slapped this card onto bar tops, dinner tables, and hotel reception desks. He thought it was a magic wand. He thought the credit limit was infinite because every time he maxed it out, the balance mysteriously vanished at the end of the month. He never asked how. He never asked why. He just assumed he was entitled to it. He handed the card to the salesman with a smirk. "Put the down payment on this," he said, "and add the ceramic coating. I don't want to worry about scratches." The salesman, a man who worked on commission and could smell new money from the parking lot, smiled and took the card. He inserted it into the chip reader. Brandon turned to Kayla and kissed her on the forehead, whispering about how good she was going to look in the passenger seat. They were already planning the Instagram post. Then came the beep. It wasn't the happy chime of approval. It was the sharp, flat buzz of rejection. The salesman frowned. He looked at the screen. He pulled the card out and wiped the chip on his sleeve, thinking it was just a smudge of dust. He tried again. The buzz was louder this time. The silence that followed was heavy. "Is there a problem?" Brandon asked, his voice tightening just a fraction. The card is declined. Mr. Bennett, the salesman said. It says, do not honor. Brandon laughed. It was a nervous, high-pitched sound. That is impossible. I just paid it off last week. Or rather, he thought the invisible fairies had paid it off. Try it again. It is probably a fraud alert because of the amount. I travel a lot. The salesman tried a third time. The machine didn't just decline the card, it displayed a code. The salesman looked at the screen, then at Brandon, his eyes losing their warmth. It says the card has been reported lost or stolen, and the account is closed. The salesman said. He placed the card on the counter. He didn't hand it back. He slid it away from Brandon, creating distance. Brandon's face went red. He grabbed his phone. He didn't call me. He wouldn't give me the satisfaction. He called the number on the back of the card. He put it on speakerphone, arrogant to the end, wanting the salesman to hear the bank apologize for their mistake. He wanted to prove he was the victim of a glitch. The automated system asked for his security code. He punched it in. Then he got a human, a customer service representative named Sarah, or Jennifer, or Mike. It didn't matter. They were the messenger of doom. This is Brandon Bennett, he shouted into the phone. My card is being declined. You need to lift the hold immediately. I am buying a car. There was a typing sound on the other end. Then the voice came back calm and professional. I see the account here, sir. You are listed as an authorized user. Yes, I am the owner of the card. Brandon snapped. No, sir. The voice corrected him. You are an authorized user on the account of Douglas Bennett. The primary account holder called yesterday and removed you from the account. He also reported the card as no longer authorized for use. The account has been permanently closed for this user ID. Brandon froze. The phone was still on speaker. Kayla heard it. The salesman heard it. The couple browsing the SUVs in the next aisle heard it. My dad, Brandon, stammered. My dad closed it. Yes, sir. The rep confirmed. He revoked all supplementary privileges. Is there anything else I can help you with? Brandon ended the call. He stood there in the middle of the showroom, the weight of the platinum card suddenly feeling like a majestic anchor dragging him to the bottom of the ocean. He looked at the salesman. The man was no longer looking at a tech entrepreneur. He was looking at a 40-year-old man whose daddy had just cut off his allowance. Do you have another form of payment? The salesman asked, his voice cold. Brandon patted his pockets. He had a debit card, but there was maybe $400 in that account. He had a wallet full of receipts and business cards for a company that made no money. He had nothing. Kayla stepped away from him. It was a small step, but it was significant. She looked at the Porsche, then at Brandon, and the realization washed over her face. The dinners, the trips, the clothes. It wasn't Brandon. It had never been Brandon. It was me. We have to go, Brandon whispered. The salesman picked up the keys to the Porsche from the desk. He dropped them into his drawer and locked it. The sound of that lock clicking shut was the sound of Brandon's ego shattering. They walked out of the showroom. They didn't stride. They shuffled. They got into Brandon's 3-year-old BMW, the one he was going to trade in the one that also had a lease payment due in 5 days that I was no longer paying. They drove away in silence. Brandon gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, his world spinning. He was realizing that freedom wasn't just about doing what you wanted, it was about paying for it. And for the first time in his life, the bill had arrived and his pockets were empty. At the exact moment my son was realizing he couldn't buy a Porsche with a canceled credit card. My daughter Megan was standing in the middle of her living room in the arts district, holding a ring light and trying to find the perfect angle to lie to her 50,000 followers. She was filming a video about abundance mindsets. She was telling a camera that if you just manifest success, the universe provides. She didn't know that the universe was currently taking a lunch break, and I was the one who had been providing the abundance for the last 5 years. Megan lived in a loft that looked like a magazine spread, exposed brick floor to ceiling windows, furniture that looked uncomfortable but cost a fortune. She told her husband Todd that they got the place for $2,000 a month because the landlord loved her aesthetic. Todd, a man who thought a checking account was something you checked once a year, believed her. He didn't know the lease was actually $4,500 a month. He didn't know that on the first of every month, I wired the difference directly to the management company, along with a hefty tip to keep them quiet about the arrangement. But this morning, the wire didn't go through, and the management company, a corporate entity with zero sense of humor, didn't care about aesthetic. I received the update from the building manager, a man I had played golf with twice just to secure the lease. He told me exactly how it went down. At 10 a.m., he knocked on Megan's door. He didn't email. He didn't call. He came in person because when a check for $5,000 bounces the rent, plus the parking fee I also paid, it warrants a face-to-face conversation. Megan opened the door phone still in hand, annoyed at the interruption. She probably thought he was there to fix the AC. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, "I am actually in the middle of filming. Can this wait?" "It cannot." Mrs. As Bennett Blackwood said he was holding a clipboard. "I am afraid we have a problem with the rent. The automatic transfer from the guarantor was cancelled. We received a notification of stop payment this morning." Megan laughed. She actually laughed. "That is impossible," she said. "My dad handles the transfer. He probably just switched banks or something. Just run it again. We cannot run it again." Blackwood said, his voice flat. "The guarantor, Douglas Bennett, has formally withdrawn his financial backing for this unit. He also exercised the clawback clause on the security deposit." Megan froze. What clawback clause? It was a special stipulation in the lease. Blackwood explained. "Since your father paid the entire year in advance, plus a double security deposit to secure this unit for you, despite your credit score, he reserved the right to terminate the agreement and reclaim the unused portion of the prepaid rent and deposit at any time upon evidence of lease violation or personal discretion. He exercised that right at 8:01 this morning." The color drained from Megan's face. She looked at the exposed brick. She looked at the expensive view. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that she didn't own the view. She was just renting it with my money. "So what does that mean?" she whispered. "It means," Blackwood said, consulting his clipboard, "that the lease is currently in default. The prepaid credit is gone. The deposit is gone. You owe the full month's rent of $4,500 immediately, plus a new security deposit of $9,000. If you cannot provide a cashier's check for $13,500 by 5 p.m. today, we will begin eviction proceedings, or you can vacate voluntarily by midnight, and we will waive the legal fees." $13,000. Megan didn't have 13,000 cents. She spent her money on clothes she wore once and trips she took for the photos. She tried to call me. My phone, of course, was silent. She tried to call her mother. Cynthia was likely still sitting in the dark, freezing house, unable to help anyone. Then Todd came out of the bedroom, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He heard the tail end of the conversation. He heard the number 13,000. Megan, Todd asked, his voice rising in panic. "I thought you said rent was $2,000. I thought you said we were covered." And that was the moment the facade crumbled. Megan had to turn to her husband and admit that she wasn't a savvy negotiator. She was a subsidized child. She had to admit that her lifestyle was a lie I had been paying for. They spent the rest of the day in a frantic, humiliating scramble. They couldn't raise the money. Nobody lends 13 grand to an influencer with bad credit and a husband who works part-time as a DJ. By 6 p.m., they were packing. Not carefully, desperately. They were throwing their curated life into garbage bags. They were dragging expensive sofas across the hardwood floor, scratching it, guaranteeing they would be billed later. They were hauling their lives down to the service elevator, sweating, arguing, screaming at each other. Megan was crying, mascara running down her face, ruining her aesthetic. She was realizing that without the filter of my money, her life was just a chaotic, expensive mess. She was moving out of a palace and onto a friend's couch, all because she had clapped when I signed a piece of paper, as I sat in my penthouse, sipping my coffee. I couldn't help but think it was the best content she had never filmed. At 9 o'clock that night, the three of them were huddled in the living room of the house Cynthia had fought so hard to keep. I know the scene because the private investigator Leo hired had a telephoto lens trained on the bay window. He texted me the update. They were sitting around a single battery-operated camping lantern that I had bought for hurricane emergencies 5 years ago. They were wearing their coats inside. The temperature in the house was dropping rapidly as the November wind battered the walls and the heating system remained stubbornly silent. It was a summit of the defeated. Cynthia wrapped in a fur coat she could no longer afford to dry clean. Brandon likely still in shock from the dealership, tapping furiously on a phone that was using data because I had cut the Wi-Fi. And Megan surrounded by garbage bags filled with designer clothes, crying about how unfair the universe was. They weren't reflecting on their actions. They weren't asking themselves where they went wrong. They were feeding off each other's rage, convincing themselves that I was the villain, that I had stolen something from them, that I had broken the rules of the game. I, on the other hand, was currently experiencing a deep tissue massage in the private thermal suite of the Sterling Tower Spa. The room was dimly lit, smelling of eucalyptus and lavender. The only sound was the gentle bubbling of the hydrotherapy pool and the soft instrumental music designed to lower blood pressure. Leo was sitting in a lounger nearby, enjoying a glass of mineral water and reviewing the latest stock ticker on his tablet. My phone sitting on the small teak table next to me began to buzz. It vibrated aggressively against the wood. The caller ID said, "Wife." I hadn't changed the contact name yet. It seemed fitting. She was the wife who divorced me, calling the husband she thought she had discarded. I picked up the phone. I didn't hold it to my ear. I put it on speaker and set it back down on the table. I didn't say a word. I just let the line open. Douglas Cynthia's voice exploded into the serene spa atmosphere. It was a shriek, high and jagged. "Are you insane? Do you have any idea what is happening here? It is freezing. The water is off. The toilets won't flush. You cut us off." Brandon roared from the background. I heard the desperation in his voice. "My card is dead. They took the car back. You can't do this. You can't just steal my credit limit. Dad." Megan was sobbing. It was a wet, ugly sound. "I am homeless. My landlord kicked me out." He said, "You stole the deposit. How could you do this to your own daughter?" They were all shouting over each other, a cacophony of entitlement. They demanded. They threatened. Cynthia swore she would call the police. Brandon threatened to come find me and beat the money out of me. They sounded like wild animals trapped in a cage they had built themselves. I listened. I looked at the steam rising from the pool. I looked at Leo, who just raised an eyebrow, and took a sip of his water. I let them vent. I let them exhaust their lungs. I let them pour all their fear and anger into the phone. knowing that none of it could touch me. I was insulated by $15 million and 40 stories of steel. Finally, they ran out of breath. The shouting died down to panting and sniffing. "Are you going to fix this?" Cynthia demanded, her voice trembling with rage. "Transfer the money back right now. Douglas, turn the lights back on, or so help me, God." I leaned forward. I spoke into the phone, my voice low, calm, and completely devoid of the apology they were waiting for. "You wanted me gone, Cynthia," I said. "You wanted the assets. You wanted independence. You stood up in front of everyone we know and said I was a dead weight. But you ruined us," she screamed. "No," I corrected her gently. "I just stopped carrying you." There was a stunned silence on the other end. They didn't know how to process a Douglas Bennett who didn't apologize. "But we can't live like this," Megan wailed. "It is dark. It is cold." I reached for the button to end the call. I thought about the years I spent working late, the years I spent worrying about their bills while they laughed at my cheap shoes. I thought about the applause at the restaurant. "Welcome to the real world," I said. I tapped the red icon, the connection severed. Their chaos vanished instantly, replaced by the soothing sound of the water. I lay back on the massage table and closed my eyes. The silence was expensive, and I had paid for it in full. The report Leo handed me 2 days later contained a photograph that was almost tragic enough to be art. It showed my wife, my son, and my daughter standing in the parking lot of a strip mall on the edge of town. They were huddled together against the November wind, looking at a storefront with a neon sign that buzzed with a dying flicker. The sign said, "Law Offices of Saul Miller." Next door was a vape shop. On the other side was a payday loan center. This was how far the mighty Bennett family had fallen in 72 hours. They had gone from the country club to the discount legal bin. They were there because they had convinced themselves of a lie. In their minds, I wasn't a strategic genius who had legally outmaneuvered them. I was a petty thief. They believed I had taken the $200,000 from our joint savings account, the money I had actually spent paying off their debts, and stuffed it into a mattress somewhere. They believed I was hiding a secret pension fund. They thought if they squeezed me hard enough, a few thousand would pop out enough to turn the lights back on and get the Porsche back. According to the deposition transcript we received later, the meeting inside that office was a masterclass in delusion. Saul Miller was the kind of lawyer who chased ambulances but usually missed the bus. He wore a suit that was too shiny and a tie that was too wide. He listened to Cynthia weep about her hardships, about how her cruel husband had abandoned her without a penny after 40 years. He listened to Brandon complain that I had committed financial violence by canceling a credit card that wasn't even in his name. And Saul, smelling a desperate client with a house that still had some equity, even if he didn't know about the mortgage, yet nodded along and fed their fantasy. He told them exactly what they wanted to hear. He told them I was guilty of dissipation of marital assets. He told them that by draining the accounts and cutting off the utilities, I had violated the status quo of the marriage. He told them he could file an emergency motion to freeze my assets and force me to pay temporary spousal support. He asked them for a retainer, $5,000. Cynthia didn't have $5,000. Her accounts were dry. Brandon had nothing. Megan was currently sleeping on a friend's futon. So, they did the unthinkable. Cynthia took the diamond engagement ring I had given her 20 years ago, an upgrade for our anniversary that I had saved for 3 years to buy, and she handed it to the pawn shop across the street. She sold the symbol of our marriage to pay a lawyer to destroy me. She got $4,000 for it. Brandon sold his watch to make up the rest. They walked back into Saul's office and dumped the cash on his desk. Saul counted it with greedy fingers and promised them he would bring me to my knees. He told them he would subpoena my bank records. He told them he would find the hidden hoard of cash I must have stashed away from my warehouse salary. They filed the suit the next morning. It landed on Leo's desk like a wet paper towel. It accused me of fraud, of theft, of malicious financial abandonment. It demanded I disclose all assets. It demanded I return the $200,000 they thought existed. I sat in my penthouse reading the legal complaint. I drank my coffee. I looked at the sum they were chasing. 200 grand. They were selling their jewelry and hiring strip mall lawyers to chase a ghost of a savings account, completely unaware that they were picking a fight with a man who now had $15 million sitting in a trust that was legally bulletproof. They wanted a fight. They wanted to drag me into court and expose me as a cheapskate. They thought they were the hunters cornering a wounded animal. They didn't realize they had just walked into a cage with a lion locked the door and thrown away the key. Let them come. I told Leo, do not settle. Do not offer a dime. Let us go to court. I want to see the look on Saul Miller's face when he realizes what league he is playing in. The courtroom smelled of floor wax and desperation. It was a small hearing room, not one of the grand halls you see on television, but to my family, it might as well have been the Supreme Court. They sat on the left side of the aisle, huddled behind Saul Miller. Saul was wearing a suit that was a shade of blue not found in nature, and he was sweating. He was shuffling papers, frantically, trying to organize a case that was based entirely on rumors and entitlement. Cynthia looked tired. The pond ring had bought them this hour in court, and she was terrified it was going to be a waste. Brandon and Megan sat beside her, looking like children, waiting for the principal to scold them, but still harboring that secret, arrogant belief that they could talk their way out of trouble. I sat on the right. Leo Graves sat next to me. He didn't have a pile of papers. He had a single slim leather portfolio and a tablet. He sat perfectly still, his hands folded on the table. He looked like a statue carved out of confidence. The contrast was painful. It was a pit bull barking at a glacier. The judge, a woman named Honorable Judge Vance, who looked like she had heard every lie ever told in a divorce court, peered over her glasses. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice dry, "you filed an emergency motion alleging concealment of marital assets. You have the floor." Saul stood up. He buttoned his jacket, realized he missed a button, and quickly unbuttoned it. "Your Honor," he began, his voice booming too loud for the small room, "my client, Mrs. Bennett, has been left destitute after 40 years of marriage. Her husband, Mr. Bennett, has maliciously drained their joint accounts, cut off essential utilities in the marital home, and we have reason to believe, substantial reason, Your Honor, that he has hidden a cash reserve of approximately $200,000. This money vanished from their savings account over the last 5 years. We demand an immediate forensic accounting and a temporary support order to restore power to my client's home." Cynthia dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. It was a good performance. Brandon nodded vigorously, glaring at me. Judge Vance turned to Leo. "Mr. Graves, your response." Leo stood up. He didn't boom. He spoke in a conversational tone that forced everyone to lean in to hear him. "Your Honor," he said, "Mr. Miller is partially correct. There was at one time approximately $200,000 in the couple's joint savings." Cynthia let out a small gasp of triumph. Saul puffed out his chest. See his face said, "I got him." However, Leo continued ignoring them. That money was not hidden. It was spent. It was spent on the debts incurred by the people sitting at the plaintiff's table. Leo tapped his tablet. The large monitor on the wall flickered to life. A spreadsheet appeared. $75,000 to pay off a gambling debt for Brandon Bennett. In 2019, Leo recited $40,000 to cover legal fees and settlements for a traffic accident involving Megan Bennett in 2020. $50,000 for unauthorized credit card overages on Mrs. Bennett's personal shopping accounts. Bennett's personal. The rest was consumed by mortgage interest and tax penalties incurred due to late filings by the plaintiff. The money isn't in a mattress, Your Honor. It is in their pockets. Or rather, it was used to patch the holes in their pockets. Saul sputtered. That is, we dispute those figures. Those were family expenses, gifts, a father helping his children. Leo smiled. It was the smile that usually preceded a fatality. Gifts, Leo repeated, tasting the word. That is an interesting choice of words, Mr. Miller, because that brings us to the counter-motion we are filing today. He opened his leather portfolio. He pulled out a stack of documents. They were crisp white and stapled. You see, Your Honor, Leo said, walking toward the bench to hand the documents to the judge. Mr. Bennett is a meticulous man. He works in logistics. He believes in paper trails. Over the last 5 years, every time his adult children came to him for a bailout, as they called it, or seed money or rent assistance, Mr. Bennett did not frame it as a gift. He framed it as a loan. I watched Brandon. He was frowning. He looked confused. Leo turned to look at my son. Brandon, do you remember when you asked your father for $30,000 to start that dropshipping business in 2021? Brandon blinked. Yeah, he gave it to me. And do you remember signing a document before the transfer was authorized? Leo asked. A document your father said was for tax records. Brandon shrugged. Yeah, just a standard form. It was a promissory note, Leo said, his voice dropping an octave. A legally binding demand note carrying an interest rate of 3%, compounded annually, callable upon demand or upon the dissolution of the guarantor's estate. Brandon's mouth fell open, and Megan Leo continued, turning to my daughter. The rent assistance, the car payments. For every check your father wrote, you signed an acknowledgement of debt. You probably thought it was just Dad being bureaucratic. You didn't read the fine print, did you? Megan shook her head slowly, her eyes wide, and Cynthia Leo said, the renovations to your mother's house, the plastic surgery, the trips, all documented, all signed, all loans. Leo turned back to the judge. Your Honor, the total principal amount of these loans extended by Mr. Bennett to the marital community and to his adult children individually stands at $450,000. The number hung in the air. $450,000. Cynthia stood up. That is a lie. He never told us they were loans. He tricked us. Judge Vance banged her gavel. Sit down, Mrs. Bennett. Leo continued, ruthless. The documents are notarized. Your Honor, the signatures are valid. The terms are clear. Ignorance of the contract is not a defense. Now, here is the kicker. Since Mrs. Bennett has filed for divorce, she has triggered the acceleration clause in these notes. The debts are now due in full. He turned to face the family. He wasn't looking at them with malice. He was looking at them like they were math problems he had just solved. Mr. Bennett is not hiding assets. Leo said he is holding a portfolio of bad debt. Debt that belongs to you. Since Brandon and Megan have no assets, and since Cynthia has claimed the marital home as her primary allocation in the divorce petition, we are filing a motion to attach a lien to the house. The house? Cynthia whispered. Her face was gray. Yes, Leo said. to repay the marital debt owed to Mr. Bennett's separate estate money. He pulled from his own premarital retirement funds to cover these loans. The house will need to be liquidated. Saul Miller looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. He hadn't bothered to ask his clients if they had signed anything. He had assumed I was a pushover. He didn't know I had spent 20 years reading the fine print of billion-dollar contracts. Judge Vance looked at the documents. She looked at the signatures. She looked at Saul. Mr. Miller, do you have any evidence to contest the validity of these promissory notes? Did your client sign them under duress? Saul stammered. I wasn't aware. My client said, they said it was a gift Leo finished for him, but the paper says it was a loan, and in a court of law, paper wins. The judge looked at Cynthia. Mrs. Bennett, it appears you are asking for $200,000 while owing $450,000. The math does not work in your favor. I looked at my family. They were paralyzed. The house, the one thing Cynthia had managed to claw away from me, the trophy of her victory, was now effectively mortgaged to the hilt, and I was the bank. I wasn't just kicking them out. I was foreclosing on their arrogance. Leo sat down next to me. He closed his portfolio. That went well, he whispered. I looked at Brandon. He had his head in his hands. Megan was crying silently. Cynthia was staring at me, her eyes filled with a horror that went beyond money. She was realizing that she had lived with a stranger for 40 years. She had lived with a man who kept score, and she hadn't even known the game had started. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just watched them. This was the cost of the applause. This was the price of the cake. They wanted to clap for my exit. Fine. But they should have checked the price of the ticket first. Judge Vance took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. The gesture was small, but in that silent courtroom, it felt like a thunderclap. She looked at the stack of promissory notes Leo had placed on her bench. She looked at the frantic, sweating figure of Saul Miller. And then she looked at Cynthia. Mrs. Bennett, the judge, began, her voice devoid of the sympathy Cynthia was desperately trying to elicit. The court finds the evidence presented by Mr. Graves to be irrefutable. These are not informal family arrangements. These are notarized financial instruments. You signed them. Your children signed them. You accepted the money, and you accepted the terms. Cynthia stood up, her hands trembling on the table. But, Your Honor, she stammered, her voice rising in pitch. The house. He gave me the house in the settlement. It is mine. You can't take it away because of some papers he tricked us into signing. I did not trick you. I said, I spoke softly, but the room heard me. I just asked you to read before you signed. You never had time for reading. Cynthia. Judge Vance silenced me with a look, then turned back to my wife. The settlement agreement grants you the equity in the marital home. Yes. However, it does not absolve you of marital debts, nor does it void private contracts between you and Mr. Bennett's separate estate. The math is simple. Mrs. Bennett, you owe the estate of Douglas Bennett $450,000. This debt is immediately due. Saul Miller tried to intervene, his voice weak. Your Honor, my client has no liquidity. She cannot pay a lump sum of that magnitude. We request a payment plan, perhaps $500 a month. Leo laughed. It was a short, sharp bark. At that rate, Your Honor, the debt would be paid off in 75 years. Mr. Bennett is 72. That is not an acceptable remedy. We move for immediate attachment of assets. The judge nodded. She picked up her gavel. The sound of wood hitting wood had never sounded so sweet. Motion granted, she ruled. Since the plaintiff has no cash reserves and no other significant assets, The court orders the immediate liquidation of the property located at 42 Oak Street to satisfy the judgment. "No!" Cynthia screamed. The word ripped out of her throat, raw and ugly. It wasn't a cry of sorrow. It was the shriek of a child having a toy snatched away. "No, you can't. That is my house. I want it. I kicked him out. It is mine." "The house will be placed in the hands of a court-appointed trustee," Judge Vance continued, ignoring the outburst. "It will be listed for sale at fair market value within 7 days. The proceeds will first satisfy the existing mortgage, then the judgment debt owed to Mr. Bennett. Any remaining funds, if they exist, will be dispersed to Mrs. Bennett. If they exist." I did the math in my head as Cynthia collapsed into her chair, sobbing into her hands. The house was worth maybe $800,000 in this market. The mortgage was $400. The debt to me was $450. After realtor fees and closing costs, Cynthia wasn't just walking away with nothing. She was walking away owing money. She was technically underwater on the prize she had destroyed our marriage to keep. She looked at me then. Her mascara was running in black streaks, cutting through the expensive foundation she had bought with my money. Her eyes were wild. "You did this," she hissed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You planned this. You let me take the house just so you could take it back. You are a monster." I stood up. I buttoned my Italian suit jacket. I picked up my phone. "I didn't plan for you to borrow money you couldn't pay back. Cynthia," I said, "I didn't plan for you to divorce me. I didn't plan for you to throw my clothes in the mud. You did all of that. I just kept the receipts." Brandon and Megan were staring at their mother with a look of absolute horror. They realized in that moment that the safety net was gone. The house wasn't a sanctuary anymore. It was just a pile of bricks that was about to be sold to the highest bidder. They weren't heirs to a fortune. They were defendants in a debt collection. "Court is adjourned," Judge Vance said. I walked out of the courtroom without looking back. Behind me, I could hear Cynthia wailing a high, thin sound of total defeat. She had wanted to be a rich, independent woman. Now she was just a homeless debtor with an expensive dress and a very cheap lawyer. And I was going to lunch. The ride back from the courthouse was silent for exactly 3 minutes. They were all crammed into Brandon's 3-year-old BM Jamu, the one he had managed to keep, only because the repossession truck hadn't found it yet. Cynthia was in the passenger seat, still clutching the tissue she had used to fake cry in court, but now the tears were real hot and angry. Megan and Brandon were in the back, squeezed together like children being punished. The air inside the car was thick with the smell of defeat and cheap cologne. Then Brandon hit a pothole. The car jolted and the dam broke. "Nice going, Mom," Brandon sneered from the back seat. His voice was laced with a venom I had never heard him use on her before. "You said he was bluffing. You said he was hiding cash in a mattress. You said we were going to get paid today. Instead, we just lost the house." "Shut up." "Brandon," Cynthia snapped, spinning around in her seat. Her face was mottled red. "Don't you dare talk to me like that. I did this for us. I did this so we could be free." "Free?" Megan laughed. It was a high, hysterical sound. "We aren't free. Mom, we are homeless. I am sleeping on a futon that smells like cat pee because you convinced me to treat Dad like garbage. You said he was weak. You said he would fold. Well, guess what? He didn't fold. He crushed us. It is not my fault he tricked us." Cynthia screamed. She hit the dashboard with her fist. "He made us sign those papers. He manipulated us. He didn't make you buy a $4,000 purse last month," Brandon shouted. "He didn't make you get that facelift. That is why we are in debt, Mom, because you spend money like you are royalty. And now Dad wants it back. $450,000. Do you have that in your purse? I spent that money on this family? Cynthia yelled back. I made this house a home. I gave you everything. And what did you do? Brandon? You gambled away 30 grand on a drop shipping scam. Don't think I don't know. Dad told me he paid it off so you wouldn't go to jail. And you, Megan Cynthia, continued turning her rage on her daughter. You and your influencer career. Dad paid your rent for 5 years. 5 years. And you never once thanked him. You just asked for more. You are parasites. Both of you. Parasites. Megan shrieked. You are the one who hasn't worked a day in 40 years. You are the one who needed a country club membership while Dad drove a 10-year-old Ford. You are the reason we are here. You poisoned us against him. The car swerved as Brandon lost focus, screaming at his mother in the rear-view mirror. Pull over, Cynthia ordered. Get out. I don't want to hear another word. It is my car, Brandon yelled. You get out. They didn't stop. They kept driving a rolling cage of hatred. They tore into each other with the viciousness of people who have nothing left to lose. They brought up old grudges. They threw accusations like knives. They blamed each other for every bad decision, every lazy choice, every moment of greed. By the time they pulled into the driveway of the house that wasn't theirs anymore, the family was dead. They weren't a unit. They were 3 drowning people fighting over a life raft that had already sunk. They walked into the house separately. They didn't speak. They went to separate rooms and slammed the doors. But the walls were thin, and the house was silent without the hum of electricity. They could hear each other breathing. They could hear the sound of their own ruin. And for the first time in their lives, there was nobody coming to fix it. No check in the mail. No dad to smooth it over. Just the cold, hard silence of consequences. 5 months is a long time in the world of finance, but it is an eternity in the world of poverty. For me, the last 150 days had been a blur of board meetings, charity galas, and the quiet satisfaction of watching my net worth tick upward on a digital screen. For my son Brandon, however, time had moved in reverse. He had gone from a man who thought he ruled the world to a man who delivered lunch to the people who actually did. I didn't see him at first. I was stepping out of the private elevator in the lobby of the Sterling Tower. It was a Tuesday, just after noon. The lobby was busy with executives rushing to power lunches and assistants carrying coffees that cost more than Brandon's hourly wage. I was wearing a bespoke charcoal suit from a tailor in Milan, the kind of fabric that doesn't wrinkle paired with a silk tie that shimmered under the chandeliers. I checked my watch. A PC Philippe I had finally taken out of the safety deposit box. My driver was waiting outside to take me to a meeting with the city council regarding my new foundation. Then, I heard a commotion near the reception desk. There was a man standing there arguing with the concierge. He was wearing a neon green vest over a stained hoodie. He was holding a grease-spotted paper bag from a discount burger joint. He looked tired. His face was gaunt. The arrogant puffiness of the last few years, replaced by the hollow cheeks of someone who skips meals to pay for gas. He was shouting about a tip about how the customer on the 12th floor hadn't buzzed him in. I stopped. The voice was familiar. It lacked the bluster of the country club, but the wine was unmistakable. I watched as the concierge, a man named Arthur, who had zero patience for nonsense, pointed toward the service exit. The delivery man turned around. His shoulders slumped in defeat. He adjusted his cap, trying to hide his face, trying to disappear into the floor. That was when he saw me. Brandon froze. The bag of burgers slipped from his fingers and hit the marble floor with a wet thud. A cup of soda burst open, creating an expanding puddle of brown liquid around his worn-out sneakers. He didn't move to pick it up. He just stared. He looked at my shoes, hand-stitched Italian leather. He looked at my suit. He looked at the way the light caught the silver in my hair that was no longer messy from warehouse dust, but styled by the best barber in the city. He looked at me not as his father, but as a stranger who looked like his father, only upgraded in every conceivable way. He opened his mouth to speak, to say, "Dad," to ask what I was doing there, but the words died in his throat. He was paralyzed by the sheer impossibility of the image. In his mind, I was supposed to be sleeping on a park bench. I was supposed to be broken. I wasn't supposed to be the king of the castle he was trying to deliver a $5 burger to. "Mr. Bennett," the doorman said, stepping forward and ignoring the mess Brandon had made. "Your car is ready, sir. Shall I have the staff clean this up?" He gestured disdainfully at the spill and at my son. "No need." "Carl," I said, my voice carrying across the silent lobby, "let him clean it up. It is his job after all." I didn't stop walking. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I walked right past him. I was close enough to smell the stale fryer grease on his clothes. I heard him gasp a sharp intake of breath as the reality of my identity slammed into him. I walked through the automatic doors and into the bright sunlight where my driver held the door of the Bentley open. As the car pulled away, I glanced out the tinted window. Brandon was on his knees, wiping up soda with a napkin, staring out at the street with a look of absolute shattering realization. He finally knew, and the knowledge was going to eat him alive. Brandon didn't finish his delivery route that day. I know this because the tracking app for his burger delivery job showed him idling in an alleyway 3 blocks from the Sterling Tower for 45 minutes. He was sitting on the curb, his hands trembling, staring at the cracked screen of his phone. He wasn't looking for a new order. He was looking for me. For years, if you searched my name, you would find nothing but a white pages listing and maybe an old high school yearbook photo. I had been a ghost by design, but today was different. Today, Leo had authorized the corporate press release. My son typed Douglas Bennett into the search bar, and for the first time in his life, the algorithm didn't ignore me. It screamed. The first result wasn't an obituary or a foreclosure notice. It was a headline from the Financial Times. It read, "The Shadow Architect retires. Global Logistics finalizes historic $15 million vesting package for Senior Strategic Advisor Douglas Bennett." Brandon must have read it 3 times. He must have wiped the grease from his screen to make sure he wasn't hallucinating. He clicked the link. The article detailed everything. It described a man who had revolutionized supply chain algorithms. It spoke of a 20-year career operating in the highest echelons of corporate strategy. And then, in the 3rd paragraph, it delivered the numbers that would stop his heart. The article stated clearly that per the terms of the Executive Retention Agreement, the full equity package valued at $15 million had officially vested and transferred to Mr. Bennett upon the commencement of his retirement date, November 1st. November 1st. I imagine Brandon froze. I imagine the blood drained from his face until he looked like a corpse. He knew that date. He knew it because his mother had circled it on the kitchen calendar for months. Not as the day I got rich, but as the day she would finally be free of me. He called Cynthia. He called Megan. They huddled together over the phone in that dark, cold house I used to pay for. They pulled out the divorce decree, the document they had celebrated like a trophy. They looked at the date stamp next to the judge's signature, October 31st. Then they looked back at the article, November 1st. It wasn't a matter of months or years. It was a matter of hours. The math hit them like a physical blow. If they had waited until the sun came up the next morning to serve me those papers, if they had let me finish my speech, if they had eaten the cake instead of throwing the folder into it, the $15 million would have been marital property. Cynthia would be entitled to half $7.5 million. But because they were cruel, because they were impatient, because they wanted to humiliate me on Halloween, they had severed the legal tie exactly one day before the money arrived. They had locked themselves out of the vault right before the time lock opened. Cynthia must have screamed. It wouldn't have been a scream of anger this time, but of pure agonizing regret. She realized that her greed hadn't just cost her a husband, it had cost her a fortune. She had traded $7.5 million for a moment of applause and a slice of ruined cake. They stared at the phone screen, realizing that the man they called a loser was the biggest winner in the city, and they were the ones who had handed him the prize. The intercom in the penthouse buzzed at 7 p.m. It was Carl from the front desk. His voice was polite, but I could hear the strain of a man trying to maintain order in a chaotic situation. "Mr. Bennett," he said, "I apologize for the disturbance, but there is a group of people here claiming to be your family. They are refusing to leave. They are making quite a scene. Sir, shall I call the police?" I looked at Leo. He was finishing a plate of sushi we had ordered in. He shrugged. "It is the final act. Doug," he said, "you might as well watch it. Let them stay." "Carl," I said into the intercom, "I am coming down." I checked my appearance in the mirror. I was wearing a navy cashmere sweater and charcoal slacks. Casual wealth. The kind of clothes that whispered comfort instead of screaming for attention. I looked rested. I looked like a man who slept on high-thread count sheets. I took the private elevator down. As the numbers counted backward from 40 to 1, I prepared myself. I wasn't preparing for a fight. I was preparing for a performance. When the elevator doors slid open, the lobby of the Sterling Tower had been transformed into a theater of the absurd. My family was clustered near the fountain in the center of the atrium. They looked like refugees from a failed reality show. Cynthia was wearing the same coat she had worn to the pawn shop, but she had tried to fix her hair. It was brittle and sprayed into a helmet of denial. Brandon was wearing a suit that was 2 sizes too big, likely borrowed from a friend because I had stopped paying for his dry cleaning, and his own suits were probably stained. Megan had tried to look presentable, but her eyes were puffy and red. When they saw me step out of the elevator, the reaction was instantaneous. It was choreographed. "Dudgy," Cynthia cried out. She hadn't called me Dudgy since 1985. She ran toward me, her heels clicking frantically on the marble. She threw her arms open wide as if she were greeting a soldier returning from war, not the husband she had evicted a week ago. "Oh, thank God," she sobbed, throwing herself at me. I didn't hug her back. I stood there like a statue, letting her collide with my chest. She smelled of desperation and cheap hairspray. "We were so worried about you. We saw the news. We saw the article." She pulled back her hands, gripping my arms, her nails digging into the cashmere. She looked into my eyes, searching for the man she used to manipulate. "Why didn't you tell us?" she wailed. "Why did you make us suffer like this?" Behind her, Brandon and Megan shuffled forward. They didn't look me in the eye. They looked at the floor, at the walls, at the gold fixtures. They were assessing the loot. "Hi, Dad," Brandon mumbled. "We missed you." "We really did," Megan added, sniffing loudly. "It hasn't been the same without you." I looked at them. I looked at the doorman, Carl, who was standing by the desk with his arms crossed, watching with a mixture of pity and disgust. I looked at the other residents walking by, trying not to stare at the spectacle. "You missed me?" I asked, my voice echoing slightly in the large space. Or did you miss the autopay? Cynthia let out a high, hysterical laugh. Oh, stop it, you silly man. It isn't about money. It was never about money. She stepped back, and then, to my absolute astonishment, she dropped to her knees right there on the Italian marble. She grabbed my hand and pulled it to her cheek. It was a gesture so melodramatic it belonged in a soap opera. Brandon and Megan, seeing their mother on the floor, followed suit. They knelt beside her, 3 people on their knees in the lobby of the most expensive building in the city, begging a warehouse manager for salvation. Please, Douglas, Cynthia pleaded, tears streaming down her face. Tears that might have even been real, fueled by the terrifying prospect of poverty. Come home. We can forget all the nastiness, the divorce papers. I didn't mean it. It was a cry for help. I was just so lonely. She looked up at me, her eyes wide and imploring, and then she said the thing that almost made me laugh out loud. I knew, Douglas, she whispered loudly. I always knew you were special. I knew you had money. I knew you were successful. You knew I asked. Yes, she insisted, nodding vigorously. All those years I complained about you being cheap. I was just testing you. I wanted to help you save. I wanted you to be frugal so we could have this future. I pushed you because I believed in you. I was protecting our fortune. Don't you see? I treated you like that to keep you humble. It was for us. I stared at her. The audacity was breathtaking. She was rewriting history in real time. She was trying to turn 40 years of selfishness into a noble sacrifice. She was trying to convince me that her cruelty was actually a form of financial planning. We are a family, Brandon said from the floor. Families fight, but we stick together. Especially now. Especially now that I have $15 million. I thought we love you. Dad, Megan Wed, please let us come upstairs. It is cold outside. I looked down at them. They were pathetic. They were broken. But they weren't sorry. They were just hungry. They looked at me and saw a meal ticket. They saw a way to get the Porsche back, a way to get the penthouse view, a way to erase the last week of consequences. Get up, I said. My voice was low and hard. They scrambled to their feet, smiling, thinking they had won, thinking the old Douglas, the soft Douglas, had returned. Cynthia wiped her eyes, already smoothing her dress, already planning how she would redecorate my penthouse. Oh, thank you, darling, she gushed. I knew you would understand. Let's go upstairs. We have so much to plan. I didn't move toward the elevator. I didn't invite them in. I took a step closer to Cynthia. I invaded her personal space just like she used to invade mine. I needed to deliver the final blow, and I wanted to make sure she heard every syllable. You are not coming upstairs, Cynthia. I said, you are never stepping foot in this building again. Her smile faltered. The light in her eyes flickered and died, replaced by a confusion that was almost painful to watch. But darling, she stammered, you said, welcome to the real world. I thought you meant, I meant the world where actions have consequences. I interrupted. The world where you don't get to abuse people for 40 years and then share in their success just because you said sorry once on a marble floor. I looked at Brandon and Megan. They had stopped smiling. They looked like deer in headlights, sensing the impact before it happened. You didn't read the article carefully, did you? I asked them. You saw the number 15 million. You saw the words net worth. But you didn't look at the dates. I turned back to Cynthia. I leaned in close, recreating the intimacy of that moment at the restaurant, the moment she had whispered that I was useless. I wanted her to remember the smell of my cologne, I wanted her to remember the texture of my voice. "Do you remember what you did at the party, Cynthia?" I whispered. "Do you remember how eager you were? Do you remember throwing that folder into my cake because you couldn't wait one more minute to be free of me?" She nodded dumbly, tears leaking from her eyes. "You signed the papers on October 31st, I said, my voice soft. "Lethal. You forced me to sign on October 31st. You clapped when I did it." I paused, letting the silence stretch until it was screaming. "My contract vested on November 1st. I whispered. "If you had waited 12 hours, if you had let me finish my speech, if you had treated me with even a microscopic amount of respect for just one more night, half of that money would be yours. 7.5 million. Her eyes widened until I thought they might split. Her mouth opened in a silent scream of realization. "But you wanted to clap," I said. "You wanted the applause. Well, Cynthia, I hope you enjoyed it because that applause cost you $7.5 million. That is $125,000 a second. That was the most expensive sound you will ever hear." I pulled back. I saw the light go out behind her eyes. She wasn't looking at her husband anymore. She was looking at a pile of burning money that she had lit herself. She collapsed back onto the floor, not in a theatrical plea this time, but in genuine crushing defeat. "You have no idea what you just did," I repeated, echoing my words from the restaurant. "But now you do." I turned to Carl. "Please escort these people out," I said. "And if they return, call the police." I walked back to the elevator. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what was happening behind me. The silence of total ruin. Carl moved with the speed of a man who had been wanting to do this for 10 minutes. He snapped his fingers, and 2 large security officers in dark suits stepped out from the shadows of the atrium. They didn't look like customer service agents. They looked like bouncers. I stood by the elevator doors, my hands in my pockets, watching the scene unfold with the detachment of a spectator in a gallery. Cynthia tried to stand up with some semblance of dignity, smoothing her dress, but her knees were shaking too hard. She looked at me one last time, her eyes pleading, looking for the man she had bullied for 40 years. He wasn't there. "Please, sir," Carl said, his voice dropping an octave as he stepped in front of Brandon. "You need to leave the premises immediately." "You can't touch me." Brandon spat, trying to summon the arrogance that had gotten him banned from the Porsche dealership. "I am his son. I am afraid Mr. Bennett has no children on the guest list tonight," Carl replied smoothly. He took Brandon by the elbow. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a vice grip. Megan began to cry again. A loud wailing. Clear's throat, sound that echoed off the marble walls. One of the officers guided her firmly toward the revolving doors. Cynthia looked at me, her mouth opening to scream, to curse, to beg. I don't know which, but she never got the chance. Carl stepped between us, a wall of black wool blocking her view of the jackpot she had missed. "Let's go, ma'am," Carl said. "Don't make us call the police. You have enough legal trouble as it is." They were marched across the lobby. The other residents watched over the tops of their newspapers and smartphones. It was a parade of shame. They were shoved through the revolving doors and spilled out onto the cold concrete of the sidewalk. I watched through the glass as they stood there for a moment, 3 figures shivering in the wind, arguing, pointing fingers until the reality of the cold forced them to disperse into the night. The elevator doors hissed shut, sealing me inside the silence. I ascended back to the sky, leaving the noise and the wreckage 40 floors below. It was the cleanest break I had ever made. 6 months later, the landscape of my former life had been completely terraformed. The house on Oak Street was sold at auction 2 weeks after the trial. The proceeds barely covered the mortgage and the legal fees. The judgment debt to me remained outstanding, hanging over their heads like a guillotine blade that deducted 25% from every paycheck they earned. I received updates from the private investigator, not because I was obsessed, but because I needed to ensure the terms of the judgment were being met. The reports painted a picture of absolute grinding mediocrity. Cynthia was living in a studio apartment above a laundromat on the east side of the city. It was the kind of neighborhood she used to make fun of when we drove through it. She was working as a cashier at a discount grocery store. I went there once just to see. I wore a hat and sunglasses and watched from the end of the aisle. I saw her scanning cans of soup, her hands dry and cracked, arguing with a customer over a 50-cent coupon. She looked older. The Botox had worn off, and the bitterness had settled into the lines of her face. She wasn't traveling to Europe. She was traveling to the end of her shift. Brandon and Megan had fared no better. The stress of the debt and the blame had shattered whatever fragile bond they had as siblings. They didn't speak to each other. They didn't speak to their mother. Brandon was working double shifts at a construction site, his soft hands blistering his dreams of being a tech mogul, replaced by the reality of pouring concrete to pay off a father he had mocked. Megan was working as a waitress at a diner, wearing an apron instead of designer clothes, serving people who had fewer followers than her, but more money in the bank. They were living the life they had always feared, the life they thought I was living. They were tired, they were broke, and they were alone. They had learned the hardest lesson of all, that money isn't just paper. It is energy. It is protection. And when you treat the source of that protection with contempt, you end up in the cold. I stood on the balcony of the penthouse, looking out at the city skyline. The wind was brisk, but the outdoor heaters kept the space warm. I held a glass of the 30-year-old scotch in my hand. It was the anniversary of my retirement. 1 year. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed a number I had saved months ago. It rang twice. "Hello?" A young woman's voice answered. She sounded tired. It was Sarah. She was the night nurse who had taken care of me last year when I had my appendix removed. My family hadn't visited once. Sarah had sat with me, brought me extra blankets, and listened to me talk about logistics when the morphine made me loopy. She was kind. She was genuine. And she had mentioned she wanted to go to medical school but couldn't afford the tuition. "Hi, Sarah. This is Douglas Bennett," I said, the patient from room 304. "Oh, hi, Mr. Bennett," she said, her voice brightening. "Is everything okay? Are you feeling ill?" "No. Sarah, I am feeling fantastic," I said. "I am calling because I have a business proposition for you. Or rather a gift." "A gift?" she asked, confused. "I established a scholarship fund today," I said, looking at the lights of the city. "It is designed to cover full tuition books and living expenses for deserving medical students. You are the first recipient." There was silence on the line. Then a small gasp. "Mr. Bennett." I don't know what to say. "Why?" "Because you asked me if I was in pain," I said softly. "You didn't ask me what I did for a living. You didn't ask me what kind of car I drove. You just treated me like a human being. That is a rare currency, Sarah, and I believe in rewarding it." She started to cry. It was a good sound, a clean sound. It wasn't the manipulative sobbing of my ex-wife. It was the sound of a life-changing. I hung up a few minutes later. I put the phone down on the railing. I took a sip of the scotch. People ask me if I am lonely. I live in a 4,000-square-foot apartment alone. I eat dinner alone. I travel alone. I looked out at the vast glittering grid of the city. I thought about the noise of my old life, the complaints, The demands, the constant low-level hum of disrespect. It was gone. All of it. I wasn't lonely. I was free. I had traded a crowded room of traitors for the solitude of a king. I took a deep breath of the expensive high-altitude air. It tasted like victory. The biggest mistake my family made wasn't divorcing a rich man. It was failing to value a good man. They spent 40 years chasing a lifestyle they couldn't afford, convinced that happiness was something you bought. But standing here on this balcony, I finally understand the truth. You cannot inherit dignity. You cannot buy loyalty. And if you have to pay someone to love you, you are already bankrupt. I learned that silence is the loudest answer you can give to disrespect. I learned that walking away isn't quitting. It's surviving. And most importantly, I learned that the best revenge is simply living a life they can no longer touch. If you enjoyed this story of justice, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of truth and consequence. And let me know in the comments, would you have forgiven them?